So I think we might kick off. Fantastic. Well, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging. Welcome to this webinar today. The secrets of adopting, I'll start that again. Secrets of digital adoption success. The missing ingredient. So you're warmly welcome to this webinar. My name is Chloe Dervin. I'm Managing Director of Webvine. I'm joined today by Barry Vorster, a member of our team. It's so exciting to have you, Barry. Thank you so much.
Lovely
All
to
that
be
you're
here.
going to share with us today. So let's get into it. So I wanted to tell you a bit about Webvine. So Webvine is a digital transformation consultancy. We love helping to energize and transform organizations and their teams using the ever-growing and enhancing suite of tools from Microsoft. We love working across SharePoint, Viva, change management and adoption. And I also want to tell you about Ingeo. So Ingeo is our intranet accelerator. It's a highly customizable SharePoint intranet accelerator. It's a ready-built intranet, which allows us to help our clients to launch a comprehensive and tailored digital workplace really quickly. It sits in our client's tenant in their environment and is underscored by Microsoft's robust, secure, and innovative infrastructure. So we've got a jam-packed agenda, as we always do. And so today we're going to be talking about what's coming at us and what happens if we do nothing. So setting a bit of the context and the challenges that we're facing with digital adoption. And then we're going to dive into what can we do about it, which includes looking at digital maturity. And finally, I'm going to ask Barry if there is a secret sauce. And we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. So this should be and hopes to be a really interesting webinar. And please do, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A and we'll hope to answer them at the end. We love kicking off our webinars by providing a poll, so getting some insights from some of you around what you've seen in terms of why digital initiatives fail. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I'd love you to put your thoughts about these questions. So why do digital initiatives fail? What have you seen? Is it around ineffective or inadequate communication? Is it about change fatigue? Is it about poorly designed or deployed changes, no allocated budget, leaders are disconnected, there's a poor cultural fit, or all of the above? I'd love to have your insights for this. There are a lot of options today. Usually we only have a couple of options, but I think this speaks to the complexity of digital adoption. And what I can see is from your polling, it's quite an even tie, actually. So inadequate and ineffective communication comes up there high in the poll results, and so does poorly designed or deployed changes, and also allocated budget. I'm stumbling over my words today. So that's not really a surprise. If I was to bet, I would have thought budget would have been an item, because when it comes to the adoption side of projects, what we often see is a bit of fatigue at the end of a project, and then in terms of allocating resources to adoption, the purse is dry. So that's really interesting. Thank you for those for responding to the poll. So let's see if we can change that. How about we dive into it, Barry, and see what we can do to help inspire you going forward. So let's firstly talk about what's coming at us. So Barry, if you can set a bit of context for us, Um, there's so much going on all the time. So why is digital adoption so challenging?
Thanks, Chloe. We specifically use this picture because it's a little bit of a picture of a black hole. And I often think of what's happening to us is at the edge of a black hole, there's something that's called the event horizon. And as you are sucked into that, and to escape the event horizon, you need to move faster than the speed of light. And I sometimes feel that we are
Mm,
moving at the speed of light, and that it is tough to discern what we need to do to keep up. And
there's
it,
no
it,
doubt
it
about that.
and I think as part of that, it's not only what's happening with us in terms of just what's happening at work, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really about all of these forces happening simultaneously to all of us within Australia and within the region and probably globally. And so
Mm,
I think that there are a whole lot of forces that influences our lives, but specifically also what happens to us at the workplace. If you think about it, I read an interesting article yesterday by uh, uh, on automotive manufacturing in Germany. And one of the commentators and somebody working in the industry said, they just can't keep up.
mm,
There's these EVs and they need to invest multi-million, but there's now sanctions from the US potentially happening, and they have competition from people doing EVs and smarter digital cars out of China. How do they keep up with all of this simultaneously? And I think part of that
mm,
is just we're living in a world where everything's integrated and quite interdependent.
mm. Interesting.
I think
Certainly.
second,
And these are some of the things that affect, our employees when they're coming to work.
and the other thing is and perhaps this is an easy and difficult one. I'm kind of I've got some gray hair and a little bit older, but there is a massive global demographic shift happening. And one of those is just an aging workforce. So in especially Western countries, we are losing expertise and we are losing knowledge at quite a fast rate. And we've not been very good at capturing that.
Mm,
And that also means that we have an interesting mix at the moment of young people who are probably better at some of the technologies than I am, or people of my age, uh, working with us. But it's a mix that we've never had before. We've always expected older people to know more. And so it's a little bit of that. The demographic mixes are changing. And I'm always a little bit careful about using all of these things about Generation X and Ys and so on. I'd rather think we are all in this space trying to deal with technology at a similar time.
mm,
So I think that's part of it. And then I do think, and especially in Australia over the last few years, but also globally, it's different when you have visceral feel of climate change.
mm,
You see the floods, if you feel the fires, it's different than just thinking about them. And so that's
mm-hmm,
also influencing the way we think about what we want to do, what organizations need to do, and what a country needs to do around all of these things. And am I being responsible? Am I being green enough? What do I do around mobility?
mm,
And I do think we were talking about many aspects around what work looks like, but we've had COVID. And that was just a massive switch that was thrown and changed the way we work. And now we talk about hybrid work as if it's normal. And hybrid work has all kinds of pluses, but it also has things that we have to manage. One of the biggest being, from all of the research I've seen, is just the fact that we don't spend enough time in coaching and mentoring younger and peer employees around us like we did before, because we just don't see each other. There's no
mm,
spare time to do it. But I think all over, the one thing that I'm seeing is this force of technology, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Mm.
And it's not only a single force, it is these advancements happening at an exponential level and automating part of our lives, and we're not actually sure how to deal with it.
Mm. We've got a great slide for that. Let's jump into that. And I know we've got a lot of content. I'm gonna have to move you along quickly, Barry. Thank you.
So, Claire, just to say, I think the most important piece of the slide is that there's a time slice and there's a rate of change part to it.
Yeah.
The truth is the confluence of all these technologies are moving at this exponential rate. And traditionally, we as humans have only adapted at a certain rate. But we are at an inflection point where the technology is outpacing our adaptability. And the question I think we have is how do we address that piece in the middle, that triangle, to make sure we have organizations and the people within there adapt better? So I quickly just want to jump into the technologies, but there's a whole host of them. There's advanced robotics, and I'm not talking about the robots and the stuff you see from Harvard and Cambridge, but it's really the things that we see in our everyday life are things like robotics process automation, which you see in most corporates, Internet of Things. I don't know, and I can't ask the question, but I'm sure that many of us have more than one piece of technology with us. Phone, a watch, all of them intermeshed. In the last few days, Apple threw a little bit of AI into their technologies. It's got me all confused because all of the things are working a little bit differently. I think there are things like blockchain. Blockchain for me is not about the money piece. It's really about credentials. My medical credentials, my personal credentials, my academic credentials, and being able to share that better. I've got a photograph of the 3D printed shoe. Several years ago, I was in New York, and I walked into a store, and they were actually printing people's shoes on the floor.
Yeah.
By Adidas. And I think all of those things, but I did some of this work before around the future of work, and it was all very scary. And we spoke about all of them, but the one that's moved the fastest, I think, is AI. And
absolutely no question.
It's gobsmacked. If you look at the latest competitor in the market, they've been able to build a new model faster than anybody has before, and it's upset the market. But I do think that this is a part of our lives that's irrevocably changed. And perhaps just to put that into context, and I think this is important as a piece of Microsoft work. There was a work trends report by Microsoft in 2024 by them in LinkedIn. And it's really about usage that they've been able to gain through all of those networks. But here's the truth, whether you want to implement Copilot or whether you put in ChatGPT or any of the other tools, 75% of people questioned, and there's quite a bit of them, are already using the tools, irrespective of whether their organizations have put it in place. Here's the scary part.
Why not? And why not? People need to take advantage and need to be experimenting.
So I don't know about you, Chloe, but I now find it indispensable. I did a lot of research for my presentation today. I do my proposals with it. I suggest that in the next year, I'll be doing more. The scary part, though, is that 46% only started 6 months ago. And that's really about that exponential curve of change. Are we using it well? That's another question.
And so can we talk a bit about, so, I think we're preaching to the converted. We're all feeling the overwhelm with how much is coming for us. And the kind of, even the FOMO of, what can we do about the FOMO of, I know there's so much out there, I should be doing something, but what should I be doing? So maybe we can jump into that. What happens? What happens if we don't do anything?
I thought I'd have a look at what's available, Google and
Yeah.
ChatGPT and AI. And I came across a few headlines, and they're from really good publications. So there was one from Forbes. I have a few others. But what's interesting is that digital transformation is happening, and it's happening at speed, but not that successfully.
Mm.
And perhaps that's because we've got a type of expectation about it, that we think it will do certain things which it can't. But mostly, I think it's also the fact, and several of the articles have homed in on that, is there seems to be an interesting link with these types of technologies between the people part of it
Mm.
and the technology, and what happens at that intersection. And
Mm.
are we helping the organizations, but especially the people in the organizations, adapt at the level and speed that they need to?
Mm.
And so I went and found a few stats, but just to give a little bit of context, about 84% of digital transformations fail from some of the surveys that have been done. The success rate seems to be mixed between tech companies or fintechs, but traditional companies like auto and pharma seems to be falling quite behind. And then I do think that there seems to be an overestimation of benefits. But before I do that, is a little bit of good news. Smaller companies with less than 100 employees seem to do better with this.
Mm. And why is that? Why does size matter when it comes to digital transformation?
I have a few guesses. I don't
Mm.
no causal research, but I do think two things. I think there's a cultural cohesiveness in smaller companies that
Mm.
really help, and if tapped into, help the organizations do that. I think there's an ability to communicate faster. And generally, I think that they've probably thought about the key areas in which they're going to apply it, because their resources, their ability to apply capital is a little bit less than a very large
Mm.
organization.
Mm.
So it's part and parcel of what they're going to do going forward.
Mm. Tell us about this. What can go wrong?
Much.
And I'm
So
sure we've all been involved in projects that have, been challenged.
so I think there are challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about that and the consequences. But I think in this kind of virtuous or non-virtuous circle, the
Mm.
truth is it's about project failure, and that
Mm.
projects don't deliver. And the interesting thing is, it's a little bit of a doing it and then failing, and probably doing the same thing again by applying the same methodologies that we did before. So the
Mm.
ones around the resistance to change, I just think people are overwhelmed. There's just too much
Mm.
happening.
Mm.
In talking to many of our clients, and when we talk about the implementations, does it have the right level of leadership, insight, and support at all levels,
Mm.
not one single department? Are we communicating the why?
Mm.
People just tired, and are we listening to them? Because some of them are
Mm.
tired, others have energy. But I do think what is happening is that there's a decrease in morale, because people feel it being done to them rather than being participative. And the problem is at this point is, and I often use this picture, if you look at a cell phone, or it's a whole lot of it happens above the glass. So the way we interact with the technology, there's all of this technology. But the biggest thing is that as soon as we implement these technologies, there are many things that we have to solve at the bottom. Decision rights, the way we do our processes, really think how we ingrain these technologies into what we do. And
Mm.
ultimately, not seeing the kinds of ROIs that we want to see.
Mm. So yeah, let's shift gear. Let's talk about what we can do. I'm hoping that you've got some really simple solutions. I have my
Right.
doubts, but what can we do simply? What can we jump on and do straight away, Barry?
I don't think that there's a panacea. So
Mm,
it's a little bit like putting your BMI score on the fridge and think that'll make you do exercise or eat better. It's not going to do that. It's how do I see myself in the mirror and find ways to practically think about these things. I find this model very useful. It is a model that says, ultimately, if I want to have a digital first culture, which is around digital mindsets and agility, I really need to think about three things because they're embedded. That culture is embedded in our systems, the way we do approvals, the way we've thought about where information goes to and how it's processed. But I think mostly it's also tying that into the practices and behaviors. And what's important about this is a multiplication game. If attention to some of those near to zero, then the overall equation is zero. And so as much as you want to just say let's put in the right systems, if you don't give credence and time to the other thing, I think it brings you down to a 0 point.
Can you give me an example of that?
I often, at Webvine, we often ask, can you also make sure that we do the training? And I'll try and put that into context. And I think training in this in such an environment is often an event. Come and help us do the training, which will help us solve the problem. But it might be that if you go to the system, the search functionality hasn't been optimized, so it's difficult to get to the documents. One thing. But most of the time, I think we've not been clear about the behaviors we expect or jointly want from each other when we implement such a system. And so I think we'll keep this as an
So attacking just the training is not gonna not in isolation.
There's a lovely quote, is you can't think yourself into acting differently. But you can act yourself into thinking differently. And so just doing some training and expecting people to think differently is probably not the answer. It is in changing your behavior, knowing what is out there, and then bringing both of those together. So I do think, Chloe, when we talk about, and I'll dive into this, is just understanding digital maturity. Digital maturity is about a cohesive, consistent thinking about where it fits into the way you want to service your clients, how that translates into your strategy, the processes that underlie it, the technologies you want to use, but most importantly, that slice, how does it affect your people? And I think what we've been trying to do is to understand what are some of those elements, and we have an assessment at hand that helps us understand what is a conducive environment, workplace environment, an environment around people. And we found some areas that are important. So what is the work climate like? Are we adaptive? Have we enabled people around digital? Is leadership supportive of what we need to do? And generally thinking about what it looks like between myself and the people around me. And we've developed a set of questions that help us determine where either a department or the entire organization is in such a framework. Are they ready for the adoption?
And so so this assessment covers more of people's experience, more of the sort of softer analytics. What about how can you feel confident around that? Like, is there any hard data that you could also look at?
But I often think when talking about data reporting and this together, it's really important to triangulate 2 sets or 3 sets of data. And in this case, I think it would be very useful to see what the perception data tells us about people by age group, by department. But triangulating that, for instance, with Microsoft Viva Insights, where we can actually see how people are interacting with SharePoint or with Teams or with Copilot, and seeing there are correlations, differences, and I would suggest you'll even find interesting correlations that we've not thought about.
Let's bump along. Let's look at, yes, let's look at this. So this is a really interesting slide. It shows us 5 different categories of assessment of digital maturity. Can you tell us quickly about this, and then maybe we could have a little deep dive into it?
So Kyle, I'll quickly, as an output of the assessment, one can categorize either the organization or specific department and so forth as being reactive, developing, foundational, strategic, and future ready. What I have found is just, and we've spoken about it, just doing the training or doing some change management without calibrating that correctly. The truth is, one size doesn't fit all, and all organizations are not at a similar level of maturity. The truth is also is without doing some of the baby steps, it's difficult to accelerate to the level you often want to be. And perhaps if we just jump into it, I'm going to use each of them quickly and just talk about them. In this kind of reactive phase where people are beginning to explore the digital tools, often a non-profit or a smaller organization, let's say an NDIS organization in Australia. I think an important word here to pull all of this together is curation. Curate a message, curate content, and start thinking about disseminating that to the people around you. And originally, I would have thought in the old days that would have meant to go off and build e-learning. I think most of that is available either through Viva Learning, or you can use YouTube videos, put that onto your internet sites and enable people to get a feel of what's happening digitally in the world. And then I think in the second one, it's really about setting the baseline, is fostering this culture of innovation and experimentation. And I think secondly is finding those people, these authentic change advocates who want to do this, who have an energy to pull into projects like this, bring them together so that they can also infuse some of that enthusiasm to other people. And then when we get to this kind of foundational level, it's about having clarity about how you want to support that. Make sure that there's a link to, I think, some of the recognition programs, but really start thinking, this is not a single event, it's a continuous process.
And what would be an example of a foundational organization?
So, sorry, I think this is often like a healthcare provider, either in our case across several states or with several facilities, lots of front-end people, frontline workers who need to change their practices. They're going to how they report, how they record client information. That's typically an area that I would think is intentional. As we get to this area, for me, the key word is around metrics. Being able to set metrics around what we want to see. And when I say metrics, these could be anecdotal, they could be business-like, they could even be informal, but finding ways to measure and make people aware. And it could be that you build a very easy to understand dashboard into your intranet site where everybody can see what's happening, and you underpin that with videos of good behavior across the organization. And then I think lastly, and you asked me what kind of organizations, I would think it's a fintech or a larger retailer or financial services firm. And then when you are really future ready, I think there's a step change. The step change is instead of doing some of this, you become a leading company. So it's really about you leading around best practice and digital cultures, but also around the way you use technology and think about it. And I'll give you an example. There's a lovely example at the moment about Spotify who have changed HR reporting probably forever. And what they've done is they've built a new HR reporting framework that doesn't work in any way that we used to. It builds a song list of reports for you based on your interactions. And hence, it's a little bit different. Now you've got a few favorites, you can listen to songs, but it thinks about data in a very different fashion.
So a tech, you gave the example here of a tech company that's continuing, and sometimes I think, some of these tech companies may not have the legacy of, a legacy of a large, government organization or something like that. So, they can move more quickly with aligning their practices and behaviors and systems.
I think scarily though, sometimes, Claire, just to say that facetiously, sometimes we, and I'm going to include myself, try very hard, but also not that good at setting all of these examples because we're trying so hard to do this for other people. But perhaps.
So yeah, I'm realizing we are over time, Barry, but is there a secret sauce? Is there anything we can do to 10x, what we're doing in terms of digital adoption?
I think there's two things for me. The one is, and it's encapsulated in that middle sentence. It's the fact that learning is not an event, but needs to be continuous if you want to be able to survive and adapt at this point. But if you want to thrive as an organization, we need to think of it as being ever present, part of the fabric of any organization. And then I'm often asked, so when we do change management, are we going to change the culture? Are we going to change the behaviors? But often I think it's more a case of tapping into the latent cultural energy that's already in place, but finding the best. And so for me, those are some two of the secret sauce pieces, ingredients. It's going to be continuous, and you've got the energy, find ways to tap into it.
So working with what you've got. So I guess wrapping up and bringing this really interesting slide to life and thinking about, what is it that we can do to support human adaptability to the ever progressing technology and innovation space that we're operating in. And what you've talked about today, Barry, is really coming down to building a culture that looks at practices, behaviors, and systems coherently. And it's not just focusing on one of these areas, but working out for your organization where you're at and what is the essence of your culture and how you can work with that across practices, behavior, and systems to bring a big step change and leap you forward to a position where you're working in line with the technology that's relevant to your organization and your industry. So just realized we're over time, but I did want to there was one question I thought would be, capturing on some of the comments we were talking about before. What can bigger organizations learn for smaller ones in terms of implementations? Have you got some thoughts on that?
I think big organizations can learn that, firstly, perhaps making their projects smaller. So finding ways to do smaller proofs of concept, smaller projects that build momentum and energy. So that's the one part. Communicating that well to everybody in the organization. And then I think being very consistent about behavior. If we talk about data, if we talk about unstructured data and document management, how do we embed a behavior like trust and respect into the organization so that everybody does it? I think it's easier at a smaller level because it's easier to communicate, but being able to do that at a larger level and embedding some of those behaviors so that it's important for everybody.
Thank you. Well, we are over time, but wanted to thank you so much, Barry, for sharing your insights. Sorry, I had to rush you along there. We could probably have talked for a lot longer and honed in more specifically. But thanks to everyone who's been joining us for this webinar. And please feel free to get in touch if you wanted to talk with us more. We'd be very happy to talk you through what might assist you and your organization with your digital adoption. So thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Chloe, and thanks for everybody joining us today. It's lovely to have spent the time with you.